Praise the Lord. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unpack what has to be one of the most intense, multi-layered chapters in any ancient text. We're looking at Genesis chapter 30. Now, at its core, this is a deeply personal story about a man named Jacob, who's just desperately struggling to build both a family and a livelihood. But honestly, when you look beneath the surface, it reads exactly like a modern thriller. We've got extreme domestic tension, brutal ultimatums, and a high-stakes business manipulation that literally rivals any modern corporate boardroom drama.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll be starting with the sister rivalry, moving into the mandrake trade, and the birth of Joseph. Then, we'll pivot to the business side with the livestock contract, check out Jacob's really clever breeding strategy, and finally, wrap things up with 3 actionable steps you can apply to your daily life. All right, part 1. The sister rivalry and the struggle of building a family. Okay, let's dive into this.
We are stepping into a household that is completely consumed by competition and heartache. Rachel is Jacob's favored wife, but she can't conceive. Meanwhile, her sister Leah is having child after child. Rachel reaches this breaking point of absolute desperation and jealousy, and she issues this terrifying ultimatum to Jacob. She says, "Give me children or I'll die." Jacob naturally responds with anger, basically pointing out, hey, I'm not God. This kind of overwhelming tension, it might actually remind you of the profound struggles modern families face today with fertility or even the really complex dynamics of blended families. In her desperation, Rachel resorts to an ancient practice that we could kind of think of as a very early, very messy form of surrogacy.
Now, looking at this family tree, the complexity is just wild. Rachel gives her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a wife so she can build a family through her. Bilhah bears Dan and Naphtali, and Rachel literally declares, "I've had a great struggle with my sister and I have won." But Leah isn't done. When Leah stops having children, she mirrors Rachel's exact strategy. She gives her own servant Zilpah to Jacob, and Zilpah bears Gad and Asher. Guys, this isn't just a list of names, it's practically a scoreboard in a fierce, heartbreaking domestic competition. Every single birth is being weaponized in this massive struggle for Jacob's affection and for societal status.
Which brings us to part 2, the mandrake trade, a bitter exchange.
So this rivalry reaches an absolute boiling point during the wheat harvest. Reuben, that's Leah's son, finds some mandrake plants out in the field. Now, mandrakes were widely believed in the ancient world to boost fertility. Rachel desperately wants them, so she asks Leah for them. And Leah's response, it is just dripping with years of accumulated bitterness. She says, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" I mean, wow. You can practically hear the raw, unedited pain of a woman who feels entirely unloved.
So how do they resolve this? Through a cold, highly calculated transaction. Rachel essentially says, fine, Jacob can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. Think about that for a second. They are bartering time with their own husband as if they're trading goods at a flea market. When Jacob comes in from the fields later, Leah literally marches out to meet him and says, "You must sleep with me. I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." It's such a stunningly transactional moment, and it really highlights just how fractured this whole household has become.
And the result of this transaction is that Leah conceives yet again. She names her 5th son Issachar. Why Issachar? Well, because it sounds like the Hebrew word for reward. Leah literally views this child as a divine paycheck, a reward from God because she gave her servant to her husband. She then goes on to have a 6th son, Zebulon, and a daughter, Dinah.
Moving on to part 3, the birth of Joseph and Rachel's ultimate relief.
After years and years of watching Leah and the servants expand the family, the narrative hits a major turning point. God remembers Rachel. Now, what's really interesting about this is the psychology behind the name Rachel chooses when she finally gives birth to her own son. She names him Joseph. She says, "God has taken away my disgrace." But here's the kicker. The name Joseph literally means, "may he add." So even in her most profound moment of relief, even after finally getting the one thing she wanted most, her chosen name is already a plea for more. "May the Lord add to me another son." It just goes to show how deeply ingrained that anxiety and fierce competition had become in her spirit.
All right, let's shift gears a bit. Part 4, the flocks and the contract, naming the wages.
With the birth of Joseph, our story pivots straight from the domestic sphere into the business sphere. Jacob decides it is finally time to provide for his own household, and he tells his father-in-law, Laban, that he wants to return to his homeland. Laban, however, does not want to lose his star employee. He admits, "I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you.
He basically writes Jacob a blank check, saying, "Name your wages and I will pay them." So Jacob reminds Laban just how much the flocks have grown under his care. And then he proposes a very specific corporate-style contract. Jacob says his wages will only be the speckled, spotted, or dark-colored animals. Anything pure white, that stays with Laban.
Laban immediately agrees to this, and why wouldn't he? Genetically, speckled and spotted animals are the absolute minority. But Laban, he's a classic swindler. On the exact same day they make the deal, Laban exploits a massive loophole. Before Jacob can even claim his wages, Laban secretly removes all the existing speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals and hides them a full 3-day journey away, leaving them in the care of his own sons. He forces Jacob to start his brand new enterprise with absolutely zero breeding stock of his own color. Laban is totally convinced he has completely outsmarted his son-in-law.
Let's move to part 5 and see how this builds. Jacob's breeding strategy, which is basically ancient animal husbandry.
Now, Jacob doesn't just roll over and accept defeat here. He mounts a highly visual counterattack. He turns to an ancient process that reads almost exactly like an agricultural manual. Step 1, he takes fresh-cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and physically peels back the bark to make these white stripes. Step 2, he places these visually striking, striped branches right in the watering troughs. Step 3, when the flocks come to drink and are in heat, they mate directly in front of these branches. The result? They bear young that are streaked, speckled, or spotted. And step 4, Jacob sets these newly born spotted animals apart to build his own separate, independent flock.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real genius of his strategy. You see, Jacob didn't just want a lot of animals. He wanted the best animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would make sure to place the branches in the troughs so they'd mate near them, producing spotted young for himself. But if the animals were weak, he kept the branches hidden. So the weak animals went to Laban, and the strong ones went to Jacob. He systematically ensured the absolute strongest genes flowed directly into his newly formed enterprise.
Laban tried to rig the system, but Jacob used creativity and serious resourcefulness to overcome it. The text wraps up this chapter by telling us that in this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous. He didn't just get a few sheep, right? He came to own massive flocks, male and female servants, camels, and donkeys. He literally turned Laban's trickery into massive personal wealth.
And that brings us to part 6, 3 daily actionable steps.
So the crucial point is, how do we apply this ancient narrative to our modern lives today? Well, we can extract 3 highly actionable steps. First up, define clear terms in your agreements. Whether you're signing a major business contract or just making a commitment to a friend, learn from Laban's trickery. Be hyper-specific to avoid those loopholes. Second, leverage the resources you have creatively. Think about it. Jacob was left with nothing but plain white sheep, but he used his knowledge of his environment, the branches, the watering troughs, to create a thriving business out of thin air. Use what's right in front of you. And third, practice patience and long-term goals. From Rachel agonizingly waiting for a child to Jacob slowly, methodically breeding an entire empire flock by flock, real growth takes time, and it takes immense resilience despite the inevitable setbacks. Before we go, I really want to leave you with this provocative question to ponder. How do these ancient conflicts over family dynamics, jealousy, and wealth mirror our own societal struggles today? Because honestly, human nature hasn't changed all that much, has it? We are still navigating these very same hurdles in our own homes and workplaces every single day. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Genesis 30. If you found this explainer valuable and you want to keep uncovering the incredible stories hidden within these texts, please like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.